Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the 2018 Market Pulse Survey, Balancing Efficiency and Security in Today's Enterprises. I'm Shay Mann, and I will be your moderator today. Today's webinar is in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions throughout the event, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A panel, and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded, and we will email you a link to the recorded version tomorrow. Joining us today is Juliette Rizkallah, Chief Marketing Officer here at SailPoint. And we have got a lot of great things to cover today, so with that, Juliette, I will pass it over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Shay, and good morning, everyone. Let me start by asking you a question, or just go through a fantasy trip with me. Imagine a workforce who pay close attention to their digital interaction. They will make sure their passwords are long and complex. They are not shared among various personal or work accounts. They avoid using applications that their IT team has not approved for them to use. And they're generally vigilant with how they share sensitive company and customer data as part of their job. These workers sound like a dream come true for their IT team counterparts, don't they? Unfortunately, this is not today's workforce. The reality is that most employees generally view security as a hindrance to doing their jobs. And instead of following security protocol, they are skirting the issue, choosing convenience over security. This not only puts them at odds with IT, but it has made employees a sizable area of exposure for companies today. This is just one area that came to light in our 10th annual Market Pulse survey. So before I dig into the results, let me give you a bit of background on our Market Pulse survey. Every year, we partner with a research firm to take a pulse on how individuals, not just IT organizations, users, but also end users, approach cybersecurity and compliance mandates. This year, which is our 10th year, our questions focus on topics to better understand how today's enterprise balance efficiency and security. With our research firm, we interviewed over 1,600 employees at organizations with at least 1,000 users or employees across Australia, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, and the United States. So now let's turn to see what this survey revealed. There were three themes that became apparent as we analyzed the survey results this year. The first is around today's workforce and their cybersecurity habits. It's one of our most favored topics each year. As it turns out, in the face of constant widespread change, many things end up staying the same. Unfortunately for enterprise security, one of those is the persistence of bad cybersecurity habits by today's workforce. In previous years of doing this survey, SailPoint found poor password hygiene and other harmful security practices were rampant among users. This year is no different, and in fact, the problem has only gotten worse. Let me share the first data. This year we found that 3 in 4 respondents reused passwords across different accounts, 3 out of 4. It is a practice that has become more frequent over time. In 2014, when we asked the same question, only 56% admitted they're reusing passwords. This represents an increase of nearly 20. It's either that or the respondents are not ashamed anymore to admit their bad practice like they may have been in 2014. It is true that the debate over passwords is shedding light on how impossible it has become for an individual to just remember a different password from every single application they use daily. Think about what you use at work and what you use in your personal life, and try to even count how many passwords you may have to remember. While it is easy to understand that users will run for efficiency and convenience by reusing password across sometimes a dozen or more applications, it is disconcerting from a security standpoint. With the amount of data breaches we see every year, targeting corporations' sensitive information, and with many of them caused by compromised user credentials, this habit of reusing passwords, even just within one company, can grant hackers access to important business systems and sensitive data that they will not have had access to otherwise. On top of that, the number of respondents who admit to duplicating passwords between work and personal accounts is troubling, reaching 48%, almost half. This is a huge red flag for one reason. Should an employee account credential be compromised on one of their personal accounts, and they use those very same credentials for one of their work accounts, suddenly their employers is potentially exposed. You think that's kind of a stretch? Well, do you remember the Ashley Madison breach, right? This famous site where people can have affairs. I think it was a couple of years ago. Well, when this data breach happened, our CISO at SailPoint quickly went to check whether any SailPoint employee account could be found on the list that was revealed through the breach. Luckily for us, none had been compromised, but while doing this search, he found a customer account in the exposed list. Of course, we quickly called our customers and suggested or highly recommended a password reset using SailPoint identity governance to protect the corporation data and assets, not knowing if the users had shared the password, obviously, but in the likelihood that it was one of those 47%, it was probably safe to ask for a password reset. This is what we often call the domino effect of a data breach, and it happens very often. For example, say a data breach occurs on a website where users are logging in with personal account credentials. Once stolen, that user credentials are made available to hackers on the dark web. Anyone can buy those credentials, and then they can be used again and again to carry out future cyber attacks on personal or corporate accounts, different accounts than the one that they were grabbed from, but other accounts for the same email address where very likely users will have repeated the same password. This practice by hackers has most recently been labeled as credential stuffing and involves attackers taking username and password captured from one breach and using them to breach additional sites where people reuse those credentials. They can be very effective at doing that, automating just the tryout on one side of various credentials. And actually, we saw this happen with the HSBC hack just a few weeks ago. If you had followed the news, in this instance, attackers did that same practice of credential stuffing. They were able to steal names, date of birth, account numbers, account history, plus personal contact details like phone numbers, mailing address, email address for exposed customers. In the end, it all came down to users who duplicate passwords across work and personal accounts, which ultimately exposed HSBC. This domino or chaining effect that a data breach can have across multiple organizations is serious business. Aside from the HSBC example, we saw this in the past with two very well-known data breaches. The Dropbox breach that occurred in 2016 and the LinkedIn data breach, the one back in 2012. It came down to one Dropbox employee whose password had been exploited in the LinkedIn breach to be actually breached again in the Dropbox breach. So taking a step back, it is not entirely surprising in how lax the workflow has become with the password practice. With the explosion of applications, especially cloud applications being used in the enterprise that need to be properly managed, if not governed, the number of passwords and access one user needs has grown tremendously. So can we blame users? Employees will always prioritize convenience over security, and memorizing passwords for 10, 15 apps at work, in addition to those we each use in our private life, is just not as realistic today. I know I have difficulty myself, and my awareness of the risk is very high due to my job in this industry. So what has changed in the last 3-5 years that have caused employee habits to get worse and not better? After all, we are training them almost every quarter or every 6 months or every year. The awareness and the news about data breach is at its utmost. So it is no secret that data breaches are more common than ever before. They make headlines on a daily basis, but users continue or increase their bad practice. So perhaps what has changed is that IT teams are more short-staffed than ever, and even if they have the headcount to fill in, there is such a wide skill gap today that finding and hiring the right talent is nearly impossible. If your number of users and your number of apps is increasing, but your staff in IT is not, then the catch-up is impossible. This has made IT teams to have to choose either efficiency or enablement versus striking a balance across both. It is no wonder that employees are fighting their way around IT, which we'll discuss in greater depth in just a moment, and explains in part why their cybersecurity habits have deteriorated over time. Another theory, which I tend to believe, is that users feel that they have no control on data breaches. They are inevitable. It is not a matter of if, but when. So why bother? Tough situation, to say the least. But the reality remains that today's enterprise is challenged with securing their kingdom from outside threat more than ever today. There is no more network perimeter to secure anymore, thanks to digital transformation. A company's users have become the new security perimeter and need to be treated as such. And these company users are not just the employees, but it's also its contractors, its partners, sometimes its customers, and even software bots used for automation purpose within those companies. And because of that, today's workforce needs to recognize the impact that their cybersecurity practice is having on the security of the company that employs them. Even if that means productivity has to take a back seat from time to time in the name of security. But as we know, it has not been a balance that has been done. So some other things need to give, and the IT staff needs to be equipped to assess and to adapt to this increase of users and application. So according to our survey results today, today's workers are not just making that connection, and they certainly are not open to making trade-offs just to ensure a more secure working environment. Because of that misconnection by today's workforce, they are railing against IT policy, which has caused a sense of tension between the IT team and the workforce they are trying very hard to secure and enable. And this was the second major key finding from a survey last year. In the past years, we were highly recommending that the business users and IT team up, and that the users become the shepherd of security. And while there is always a hope that this will happen, what we see in these surveys is that the divide between the two groups, IT and users, is widening. While IT is off trying to manage the massive digital transformation underfoot, today's users simply want to do their job faster and more efficiently. So there's two sides to every argument. It is a never-ending battle, users wanting to procure more software and apps, and IT teams stretch to the max trying to keep up to properly onboard those apps to secure the business. Even I, yesterday, was emailing my marketing operation manager asking if the purchase of some technology that we're using for account-based marketing was coming on, and the answer was, we're waiting on the technology, on the IT security review before we can issue the PO. So this is a reality on a daily basis for every single business users. So to underscore that point, our survey found that over half of respondents stated their IT department can be a source of inconvenience in their organization, showing that the divide is growing. As I mentioned earlier, with IT teams so short on staff and struggling with the skills gap that is running rampant in the industry, if they have to choose security or enablement, they ultimately have to choose securing the business first. It is for this reason that employees who will choose productivity and business first are feeling frustrated that they are not being given access to the application and data they need faster enough to do their job. And they are taking that frustration out on the IT team. Today's workforce is starting to see the bigger picture in a way, and the negative impact of this frustration has led to employees searching for a way around the IT department. In fact, employees today are taking steps to bypass IT, with around 1 in 3, or 31%, respondents saying that they or one of their colleagues have purchased or deployed software without IT help. Shadow IT are still there. Since first asking this question of survey respondents in 2014, we have seen an increase of 11%, signifying the problem is only getting worse. Or again, people are not so ashamed of saying that because of the issue being talked over and recognized as a real one. But what this means is that today's IT team is largely in the dark. How on earth can they protect what they cannot see and do not know about? To be honest, while efforts to work around IT policies are often not done for malicious reasons, the simple fact is that these efforts increase risk for the organization, something most employees are not thinking about in their quest to move faster and faster. And with so many of today's workforce not connecting the dots between their cybersecurity choices on the job and the impact that they could have on the security of their company, many are unknowingly introducing the risk for the company that employs them. For example, our survey found that 13% of respondents will not tell IT immediately if they thought they had been hacked. 13%. It sounds low, but when you consider all the users in a company, that's a lot of exposure that cannot be mitigated. And with that simple act, they have just made a bad situation potentially much, much worse. We have all seen the negative impact that data breach can have on a company and its brand, from revenue losses, dips in financial performance, stock, to loss in customer confidence and brand loyalty. But by not notifying ID that they have been breached could mean that they have just slowed down the IT team ability to mitigate the breach, sometimes to stop it before truly sensitive information is accessed, and potentially lessening its impact. Never mind the impact on the business if they must comply with regulation like GDPR, which demands notification to customers within 72 hours of a data breach for GDPR, or within reasonable time frame for other laws such as the Californian one. Failure to comply means steep fines, as we all well know by now. On top of failing to notify IT if they suspected a breach, nearly half of survey respondents would blame the IT department for a cyber attack. There is no win here for the IT department. And a further 40% of respondents will not feel personally responsible if their company suffered a cyber attack as a direct result of an employee being hacked. Putting the blame game aside, the larger takeaway is that there is a serious lack of accountability by today's workforce. They are so focused on doing their job and at all costs that they are more than willing to put all accountability back on the IT versus seeing security as a shared responsibility. Again, they felt they have no control, so how could they have any responsibility in a security incident? Altogether, the statistics shine a spotlight on the dilemma that today IT teams face every single day. How to help today's workforce access all of the applications, system, and data they need to do their job without sacrificing security in the process. Part of that solution lies in a workforce that needs to see the bigger picture, yet continually fails to. In an ideal world, they can be part of the security solution by sticking closer to the IT policies that are in place. This, of course, is easier said than done and clearly has not happened to date, despite effort to educate an industry-wide push towards better awareness. So the question becomes, is it really about education? Does it matter to employees? it seems the more we educate, the more it falls on deaf ears. Workers have simply given up, feeling like they have no control. So why bother, as I mentioned that before? Regardless of how you look at the problem today between the workforce and IT, the challenge is only being compounded by a new set of threats that IT needs to address, and as we will turn to next. So in today's highly digital world, there will always be new threats emerging that IT teams need to address. While today's workforce is a huge exposure point for organizations, there are plenty of new threats avenues emerging as well. A large driver behind these new threats hitting enterprise is the constant revolving door of new technology in the workplace. This emergence of new threats was the third key finding from a survey this year. As the digital transformation blurs the traditional security perimeter with cloud apps, it is also redefining the definition of a user. If I ask you to define your workforce, would you be able to tell me who exactly your users are? Well, I asked that question last month during our user conference to a few customers, and one of them basically admitted that he only found out one new profile of users 2 months ago, even though they have been living and working and accessing data in their organization for over 2 years. So we're not talking just about humans that you can count, that you can see, that you can interact with, like remote workers or contractors or partners, third-party, full part-time employee. But we're also talking now about a new user lurking on most enterprise networks today, the bots, the software bots. That user is actually a non-human software bot. Enterprise, as we have started to learn, are increasingly adopting software bots powered by robotic process automation to increase business efficiencies across the business. For example, bots are already performing a variety of tasks in the enterprise today, from access to extract data to chatting online with customers, validating API keys. They are being used to automatically disburse loans even. I can't imagine a situation where human access to do this task wouldn't be properly governed. Yet for many of the software bots, that is exactly what is happening today. To do the task that they've been programmed to do, they will basically have to access data, sometimes sensitive information, as you can see from the last example of the loan disbursement. But the management of their access, the governance of their access rights is just inexistent today. So with users being the attack vector of choice today, enterprise absolutely need to govern software bugs, just like they already do for the rest of the user population. And they need to move quickly to do that, as a marketplace survey points out that just under half of respondents are either already using AI, chatbot, and personal assistant in some form or are planning to do so, and that's just one type of bots. In fact, over 1 in 10 already using these in the workplace to increase efficiencies. And I actually have a strong belief that that number is very conservative, because a lot of the IT staff do not know when bots are implemented in the enterprise. It's a new technology. Even if the users are working jointly with IT, they may not think this is something they need to mention. It is just an oversight today for which some IT department, mostly early adopters, are catching up on. Regardless, with this new type of users becoming part of the workforce more and more today, IT teams need to secure their access just like any other users they will secure. Leaving them unsecure is a wide open entry point for any hackers, and they could very easily compromise a bot credentials and immediately get access to a company's sensitive application and data. Speaking of data, this is another emerging threat dynamic today. Corporate data stored in files is increasing exponentially, and Gartner has mentioned that 80% of all corporate data actually reside in files. not so much in your system like an SAP or Workday, but more in files, PowerPoint and Excel that sometimes you even put on Dropbox or Box there in the cloud. And employees have now unprecedented and often unlimited access to it. So you may have a lot of containment around your SAP data, but if somebody extracts to an Excel your financials and put it on Dropbox, then all the access rights to the SAP data are not in place. And that is a huge risk both for security and compliance. And enterprises today are struggling to understand, honestly, where their sensitive data reside and what that sensitive data entails, let alone how to manage and secure it. Tied to this explosion in corporate data stored in files, an emerging threat to sensitive customer data and how business users are handling it. The Market Pulse respondent demonstrated a clear disregard for securing customer data the same way that they secure their own personal data. This data is often stored in a structured file like PDF and presentation and shared in a Dropbox or Box, as I mentioned it. The data is already sensitive and ripe for attack, yet today's workforce does not regard securing this data as part of the duty of an employee. What they need is to share it with other employees in the most convenient way. In fact, 44% of respondents would rather have their company's sensitive information hacked rather than their own personal information. So the reality is, would you put your social security number in a file on a box account that is not managed? Probably not. But would you do the same for your customers or consumers' information and personal loans and so forth? Probably, because this is how you do your job today. But in essence, they are looking out for themselves and not applying the same security in their corporate job. Hand in hand with the sharp rise in all of this sensitive data is an increased regulatory environment. Many of these newer regulations require organizations to properly safeguard the data or face steep penalties for failing to do so. An example of this is General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, which has left a huge mark on global organizations that have operations in Europe. Our survey found that 66% of global respondents do not know what the GDPR is or what it entails. Remember, we're talking to users, not just IT folks. And even fewer, 63%, believe every employee plays a role in compliance. 63 is better than nothing, but when you have the deep fines that GDPR brings, 63% feels like way too low. So while organizations are challenged with securing the new frontiers of both users and data, today's workforce continue to be complacent in their own responsibility towards achieving that security, much to the detriment of today's enterprise. And the case in point is what you can read on that slide in terms of what it means to be out of compliance with GDPR. Data privacy regulation in the UK, in France, in Canada, but also in New York for the financial services company are the same vein. California just got added to the list, and usually California shows the path for the rest of the states. On June 18 of this year, I read that France fined a company 250,000 euros for a data breach, the largest fine in the history of the country for a data breach that was prior to GDPR. We are in the era where data privacy will cost a company not just its reputation, which is bad enough, but serious money and impact on earnings, if not respected and complied to. Just maybe 1 week ago, we heard how much Uber was going to be fined in Europe for the breach. And again, this was prior GDPR, and people are starting to even make assumption of what that would have been under the GDPR era. But more importantly, GDPR makes it the corporation's responsibility to demonstrate compliance. The accountability needs to be there, and part of that responsibility absolutely needs to trickle down to its employees. So admittedly, this statistic paints a rather grim picture of the current state of enterprise cybersecurity today. This is a recipe for a perfect storm when you consider the dual task that IT faces around managing the digital transformation journey securely and efficiently while enabling a workforce that is not ready or willing to work with IT to do their job with security in mind. However, there is some good news in all of this. There is a clear answer to the problem we uncovered in a survey this year. And that answer is to take a user-centric approach to security. In today's world, this is the only way to truly secure and enable today's modern workforce. In fact, users have become the new security perimeter, and their digital identities are the common link across an organization IT ecosystem at every stage of its digital transformation. There is a new category in cybersecurity that is getting a lot of attention and has risen to the #2 priority for CIO across the world based on the Piper-Jeffrey survey, and that is identity management. Digital transformation is happening in almost all corporations across the world, and the result is the creation of thousands of digital or even millions of digital identities that have access rights to many applications, some critical, many in the cloud, but not only in a data center on premises or in a mainframe. All those apps are still very much in use. Identity governance purpose is to enable and secure digital identities for all users across all apps and all data, whether they reside in a system or in a cloud file sharing application. Each of those areas is exploding in complexity for many reasons. These are the new frontier of what we call identity governance. We believe a modern and robust identity program should cover all users, all apps, and all data. And SailPoint's mission is to enable enterprise to grow and innovate securely and confidently. Identity governance is about answering 3 main questions: who has access to what, who actually should have access to what, and how is that access being used for all users, all applications, and all data. And when I say all users, I'm including those software bots we've mentioned. Digital transformation has significantly increased the complexity and scale of managing users and resources in the enterprise. And the picture you're seeing shows the chaos and complexity of that footprint. In addition to more users and more type of users, organizations have also application, a lot more application. And every application needs to be managed and governed, whether in the data center or in the cloud, on-premise, SaaS app, everything needs to be managed and controlled. What does it mean? It means that every users need to have access right down to the level of the data, not just having access through a password and single sign-on to the application, but what part of the data in that application can they access. It means that the access across application for one user, what we call the segregation of duty or separation of duty, needs to be in compliance with our regulation, like Sarbanes-Oxley, to name one of them, and ensure that an employee cannot overreach access to data and start doing things that will not be good for the organization. And one of the fastest growing area of risk, honestly, in the enterprise is governing access to data starting flight. This is, 80% of the corporate data. 1 in 4 users upload sensitive data to cloud apps today, and it's rising rapidly. But enterprises are really not understanding how to manage that data, right? Remember the leak of General Powell emails? This was back a few years ago, but General Powell was at that time a board member of Salesforce.com, and when his emails got leaked, the one email that he received as the board member of Salesforce.com contained all the acquisition target of the company, and those were literally posted on the web for all of us to see. crazy stuff, honestly, crazy stuff. No identity governance program is complete without handling this other 80%, most of which is unknown to the corporation, most of which has no formal owners, and most of which it is not classified or inventoried. But identity governance allows IT to see everything, govern everything, and empower everyone. It gives IT teams the full visibility and control they need into which application and data that the workforce, including both human and environment bots, are accessing to do their job. It also secures the workforce in a seamless way so that users can continue to do their job efficiently and securely without feeling a loss in efficiency, a struggle many raised in our survey these years. Our fundamental belief is that in today's enterprise, identity is power. It's power because it helps from a security perspective, but it also enables users, or it enables IT to support users in their chase for more productivity, more applications, and a higher velocity in their business. It helps IT support all kinds of users, from the employees to the contractors to the bots, accessing all kinds of applications. And importantly, in the context of a conversation today, with identity, organizations of all sizes can confidently address the tension between enablement and security exposed in the survey this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliette. Okay, now we're going to move into our Q&A portion. So just a reminder, if you have a question, submit it in the Q&A panel, and we will answer as many as we can in the time we have left. So let's jump on in. We have our first question. Let's see, can you talk a little bit more about how hackers are using legitimate credentials to access workplace systems?
Sure. So basically, we're all using our credentials to access any application. And, you know, surveys like this one are not just interesting for all of us. The hackers follow that. And, you know, there's none of those numbers that I mentioned that they don't know. So they know that people are using credentials across many applications. So they will basically target a set of users and compromise their credential by just capturing them through keylogging or spear phishing or whatever. But once they have those credentials, what they can do is that they can automate entering them in multiple systems. So let's say, you know, a Chase banking account, a Bank America, I mean, you can take all the bank. You will not know which bank that user is using, but you just kind of automate logging in into those applications and see what happens, right? So the automation of that, which we call credential stuffing, then hackers start finding where they can have access by using all those credentials that they buy for a fraction of a penny on the dark web, and they get results there. You know, so on the consumer side, it could be that your bank account is breached or something like that. But from a corporate account, if the hackers are looking at sensitive data within a corporation, that also means that if you share your credential across your work and your life, you can suddenly give them an entry into the corporation system.
Great, thank you. Okay. How does identity governance address the lack of good password hygiene that the Market Pulse survey underscores?
Well, the first thing in identity governance is that what it does is that it really looks at who has access to what and who should have access to what, kind of the current state and the desired state. And it comes from the principle of the least privilege access, meaning you only give access to users what they really need to do their job. You will be surprised how when an employee stays a couple of years in a company, he or she accumulates access rights for a slew of applications. And if that employee transfer the application that they may need being in HR, they may not need it being in marketing, But nevertheless, if it's not managed and through identity governance governed properly, then they will continue having access to those, and that is not a good thing. That's not a good thing from an insider threat, but it's not a good thing because, let's say, the employee just has some remaining access to HR system, but really because they work in a different department do not use it, then those accounts became what we call orphan accounts and are specifically targeted by hackers who see accounts that are not being used, and they will go and break into that and start doing a lot of things without the users not even noticing it, IT not noticing. So identity governance help putting a lot of that governance policies and visibility around what's going on, right? Finding orphan accounts, inactive accounts if you want, finding over-entitlement and fixing them, putting roles, models where people have access to application based on their job role, risk model, the risk of the application, what type of access do we want to give, etc. It just regulates and help IT automate the management of that access right. The other thing that it does, it has a password management module that honestly just help managing password across multiple application in the most complex way, right? There is no one, or maybe very few of us can just remember password across 20 various applications at work, and then I don't even know how many I'm using on a daily basis. Just having a kid in school, I just started having 10 more for him to pay his meals at the cafeteria and the library and so forth. It is absolutely insane. No one is capable of remembering with that. Without a password management, it becomes really, really tough. So identity governance help from a convenience, efficiencies, but also from a compliance and security, of course.
Great, thank you. So how does identity governance help IT teams with their daily workload and ease tension with employees?
Well, we talk a lot about, security and compliance when we talk about identity governance, but many times when we talk to our customers, it's really about IT efficiency, right? This solution automates a lot of the things that they do usually manually. If you have new users or new employees coming in, provisioning that users manually becomes, a task. If you have to onboard an application, so users say, hey, I want to use this cloud apps for, doing some targeting or doing some financial modeling or whatever, they have to, basically understand what type of application it is, what type of data is going to be on there, who should have access, etc. It can take time to just codify all that. And identity governance is a very good tool for IT teams to just automate everything they have to do from a life cycle of a user, life cycle and onboarding of an application, and helping also reviewing periodically who has access to what, and helping users understand where things should be changed.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. How are workplaces today using bots, and how do enterprises need to manage for this new user type?
Well, bots today are taking over manual tasks in the workplace, giving them, and therefore giving them access to sensitive data, right? If you want to do a loan disbursement, as we talked in the example, you're going to get access to a loan, and everybody knows, if you have purchased a home, you know that your social security number is there and a lot of personal information. So those bots have access to that data, right? Today, they are programmed and they are giving access, but even if the company has an identity governance program, they're just not connecting the dots that this is a different type of users, right? So basically those bots could, and I predict that they will become the new attack vector for hackers that are targeting users by saying, hey, nobody's watching them, nobody is governing them, let's go compromise a few of them and start basically entering. What you need to know is that if you get the credential of a bot, you can not only access the application that they have access to, but then you can also start being in the system and making access requests on behalf of the bot to other type of application. And if you don't have a very good identity governance program, that access request can be granted, and at that point the hackers are just, is just free into your systems.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, that is all the time we have for questions. Everyone, keep an eye out for an email from us tomorrow that will include a recording of today's webinar, and we will also be sending you the full 2018 Market Pulse Survey results for you to dive a little deeper into our findings and share with interested colleagues that may not have been able to attend. If you'd like to learn more, contact us using the information on your screen, and we will get you in touch with an identity expert. Juliette, thank you for your time today. Thank you for everyone who joined us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.